My name is Mark, and I am the chairman of this debate. The timekeeper is Lily. This debate will be judged by a panel of 3 adjudicators who are Ms. Herden, Ms. Cho, and Mr. Hazel. The topic for this debate is that reservoirs in SA should be open for recreational activities. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Glenunga International High School, and the negative team seated to my left is from St. Peter's Girls' School. The speaking time for this debate is 4 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off. I declare this debate open, and the call from the first affirmative speaker, Parent Pete Cole.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that the reservoirs in South Australia should be open for recreational activities. We, the affirmative team, define this topic as reservoirs being man-made infrastructure that provide water to the corresponding city or township, often built upon what used to be a natural water system. Recreational meaning activities that are enjoyable and encourage positive well-being, and opening meaning the opening rules presented by the current government dictating that only people be allowed in the reserve and only at designated times. As the first speaker, I'll be speaking to you about the economic benefits that opening our reservoirs will bring. I will also show how opening a reservoir sends a positive image to tourists. Our second speaker will highlight the epidemic of urban sprawl and how the solution can be found by opening reservoirs. He will also show how allowing recreational activities at reservoirs makes no difference to the quality and safety of our water supply. Finally, our third speaker will skillfully rebut the opposing case and conclude our own, leaving you in no doubt that the reservoirs in South Australia should be open for recreational purposes. To my first point, opening the reservoirs will economically benefit South Australia. To see how effective opening reservoirs has been, we can look at what impact it had in Queensland. Queensland has already opened its reservoirs, and the results have been simply amazing. In a report published by the Queensland Outdoor Recreation Foundation, it is stated that the outdoor recreation contributes annually to the gross state product of at least $2 billion and has increased profits by 15%. The South Australian government has seen this success and are looking to reap the benefits as well. A report published by the Liberal government stated that Queensland opened its reservoirs a couple of years ago and has developed a high-quality body of work around risk management and delivery of this initiative, much of which can be easily replicated and adapted for South Australian reservoirs. The obvious economic benefits have already been proven through Queensland, and South Australia is not afraid to follow suit. To further emphasise this point, several reservoirs have been opened in South Australia as a trial, and the results are just as amazing. The Minister for Environment and Water, David Spears, has said that the opening of Maiponga Reservoir in April 2019 has been an outstanding success, providing both social and economic boosts for the Flores Peninsula through thousands of visitors to the reservoir. Every time a reservoir is opened, only benefits are reaped. Why should we ignore these benefits? To my second point, reservoirs promote a positive image to tourists. Tourism is a massive part of Australia's economic growth, bringing in 9.2 million international visitors each year. Unfortunately, South Australia lacks compared to other states, where the idea of the Harbour Bridge climb or Uluru may be more appealing. Activities like water skiing, sailing and kayaking, however, are things people do look forward to, and if we were to open these reservoirs, it would encourage tourists to come to South Australia. Another factor to consider is availability. Tourists will more likely choose to stay at places that have these activities nearby. This will boost tourism and support hotel businesses alike. The surrounding urban areas will be met with more tourists wanting to stay a night or eat a meal. You'd have to either lack common sense or be downright cruel to deny the locals and tourists of this opportunity. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we, the affirmative team, stress that the reservoirs in South Australia simply must be opened for recreational purposes. The benefits are simply too great and too numerous to be ignored. With a boost in economy, tourism and local businesses, it would be simply ignorant to overlook this great opportunity. We must open our reservoirs for recreational activities. Enjoy, explore, preserve. Thank you.
negative speaker, Zara Blythe.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of our debate tonight is that reservoirs in South Australia should be open for recreational use. We, the negative team, believe this statement is false. We agree with the affirmative team's definition. The first speaker of the affirmative team has tried to tell you that it shows a positive image for tourists. This is flawed, as South Australia has many other beautiful places to explore and have fun, and tourists naturally lead to these areas. Reservoirs are not the main market for recreational activities, and tourists will not be attracted to these areas. It is not worth the extra costs and the health risks. You cannot deny the fact that these areas were simply not built for these activities, and they were simply built for storage and containment of South Australia's water. My first point tonight is that ensuring and maintaining the quality of the water will be difficult. My second point is that opening the reservoirs up for recreational use will increase the price of water for customers. My second speaker, Angel, will be talking about the environmental impacts and how there are better places and better options for people to do these activities. My third speaker, Emma, will rebut the affirmative team and sum up our team's case. My first point tonight is that ensuring and maintaining the quality of the water will be difficult. In southern Norway, a reservoir was opened up for recreational use, and the amounts of sicknesses and deaths were devastating. Approximately 2,000 people fell ill, and approximately 36 died due to high amounts of E. coli in the water. This substance was in fact brought into the reservoir by people swimming, fishing, canoeing, etc. This certain reservoir supplied half of the island with water, so it's a miracle that more people didn't get ill. This is just one example of the devastating impacts that come with opening up reservoirs for recreational use. In a recent research by the Water Quality and Treatment Commission of Australia, it states that many attempts to open up reservoirs for recreational use hasn't succeeded due to lack of security, increased climate change, and intense environmental impacts. It is frankly impossible to ensure the safety of people's drinking water. Therefore, it is absurd for the government to risk people's health just so they can go swimming or canoeing in the reservoirs. My second point is that opening the reservoirs up for recreational use will lead to water prices increasing for customers. As mentioned in my first point, there are many health risks associated with opening these reservoirs up for recreational use. This means that if it were to go ahead, lots of health research would have to go into assuring the safety and quality of the water. This would need intense funding to pay for filtering and treating the water. This would then lead to customers paying extra to accommodate the research and keeping the water clean. This is an unnecessary payment for families, and for what it's worth, it's not worth the money just to accommodate people having fun in the reservoirs. So, in conclusion, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, we strongly believe that the recreational activities do not belong in South Australia's reservoirs due to the water contamination risks and the increasing prices for customers. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Isaac Jacobs.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that reservoirs in South Australia should be open for recreational activities. This is undeniably true. Tonight I will show you how opening reservoirs to recreational activities immerses people in nature when urban sprawl and infill poses such a significant threat to our natural world. The second argument I will showcase is that the water from these reservoirs comes directly from the rivers and lakes, not going through any filtration system until after it leaves the reservoir, meaning there is no risk of contamination. To start, I will enlighten you on some misleadings in the opposition's case. First off, unlike what our opposition here said, they said it will increase the price of water, but it will not, Because the water is filtrated after it leaves the reservoir, there is no change into how it is being treated. It is still the same quality of water. They also said that opening the reservoirs will contaminate the water. We acknowledge this may be a concern, a worry, but when we say we are allowing recreational activities at reservoirs, we are not saying that we are letting contaminants in. The government of South Australia has very strict rules as to what can and can't be brought into the reservoir. They don't allow dogs within the area. They only allow people to go in designated areas and at designated times. To my first point, to understand why we should open the reservoirs, we must look at a modern problem facing our society: urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is when the residential and industrial areas of a city expand. The main effects of urban sprawl can be seen when we analyse the government's 30-year plan. First prepared in 2010, it dictates how to cope with the incredible increase of urban sprawl. It will increase the development of recreational or open spaces, meaning there will not be as much space to go outside and enjoy yourself. It will mean there will be more multi-storey buildings and less natural parks and open spaces. So, to increase the more natural spaces available to the public, we must open our reservoirs for recreational activities. The importance of being in an open natural space can be seen in the words of SA Health. They said getting into an open natural space has been shown to have more positive impacts on concentration, learning, problem solving, critical thinking capacity and creativity, as well as enhancing mental health and well-being. So, when our parks and open spaces are becoming few and far between, what better solution than to open up our reservoirs for recreational activities, to enjoy, explore and protect. My second point, the water from our reservoirs is sanitised after it leaves the reservoir, meaning whether recreational activities are allowed or not, which they should, it won't make a difference to the sanity of the water. The key fact to observe is that whether you are kayaking in the reservoir, having a picnic by the side or bushwalking a kilometre away, it doesn't affect the quality or safety of the water. This is because the water is not cleaned when it enters the reservoir, only once it leaves. Therefore, having people being recreational at the reservoirs won't make a difference to the water. Furthermore, as per the opening rules dictated by the government, dogs and domestic animals will not be allowed in the reservoir to ensure added protection and public reassurance. To quote David Spears, Minister of the Environment, "Protecting the health and quality of our drinking supplies has always come first and has directly informed the types of activities being enabled, which will vary from site to site. This and the fact that the water is treated once it leaves the reservoir means there is no risk of contamination and no valid reason to not allow recreational activities, but many to allow." To conclude, the reservoirs in South Australia must be open for recreational activities. Not only because there is no risk to the safety of the water, but in a society where urban sprawl is such a problem, opening the reservoirs produces a way to escape the stressed, cramped space of the modern world. Reservoirs in South Australia must be open for recreational activities. Enjoy, explore, protect. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Angel Lee.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Before I discuss my points in relation to the environmental and safety concerns associated with the recreational use of South Australian reservoirs, I will rebut what the Affirmative team have already discussed tonight. The first Affirmative speaker has tried to tell you how opening reservoirs sends a positive image to tourists. Once a reservoir reserve is open to recreation, the land and potentially the water takes on the role of a public open space, having multiple management outcomes, including drinking, water supply, environmental protection and outdoor recreation. This means management must protect the reservoir reserve and its role in providing drinking water, while aiming to offer a visitor experience that meets the aspirations and expectations of the public. It should be acknowledged from the outset that these multiple purposes can be in conflict, with tensions arising between stakeholders. It is also known that recreation will inevitably cause changes to the natural and built environment, but that limits of acceptable change must be established with actions taken to minimise impacts. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you how there will be no difference in water quality. The demand for recreational access to drinking water catchments is increasing. A combination of direct and indirect impacts of recreational activity in catchments can reduce the quality, safety and supply security of yielded drinking water. Our first speaker has already discussed how ensuring the quality of the water will be difficult and how there will be increasing water prices for customers. Today I'll be talking to you about 2 points in relation to the environmental and safety sides of this debate. Now to my first point about the safety issues associated with the opening of reservoirs in South Australia for recreational activities. As a result of the state government's plan to open up reservoirs for recreational activities, Adelaide's drinking water is at risk of contamination and therefore outbreaks of gastro. An independent annual report finalised in April revealed that SA water could breach Australian drinking water guidelines if metropolitan reservoirs were opened by the end of 2019, risking an outbreak of respiratory and gastrointestinal illnesses. A report by Water Futures, a water management consultancy firm, states that permitting public access to inner catchment and source water reservoirs would consequently lead to unsafe water, decreased public health and increased costs for those involved. Labor water spokeswoman Susan Close said the government would have known about the report, which she said was given to SA Water and SA Health during the same month the Maiponga Reservoir was opened to the public. Dr. Close said delivering safe water is a key function of the government. She said that the Maiponga Reservoir should be closed until the government invests in appropriate infrastructure. The government needs to apologise to the people of South Australia, she said, for knowingly putting their drinking water at risk. Clearly, opening South Australian reservoirs to the public for recreational use raises serious safety concerns, potentially endangering the health of South Australian citizens. Now to my second point, about the detrimental environmental impacts that opening South Australian reservoirs for recreational activities can result in. Many contaminants can be introduced into surface waters due to motorised and human activities, such as boating, fishing and swimming. These contaminants can be introduced as a result of maintenance activities, such as new paint, old paint scrapings, solvents, oil and grease, fuels and cleaning agents. Ships and boats contribute as the main sources of bacterial contaminants. Elevated contaminant levels have been reported in marinas with high densities of moored boats. For example, the grit produced from engine exhausts and anti-fouling paints and associated boating-related activities. Human activities such as swimming and bathing can also have detrimental impacts on the system ecology. According to a report conducted by the Victorian Department of Human Resources in 2012, swimming and bathing can cause disruption of foreshore vegetation, alteration to sediment quality and modification of habitat. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we the negative team strongly believe that reservoirs in South Australia should not be open for recreational activities due to the safety risks and detrimental environmental impacts that will inevitably result. Thank you.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Isha Jen.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that reservoirs in South Australia should be opened for recreational activities. We, the affirmative team, hold a very strong view that this is true. The first speaker has misled you into thinking that opening reservoirs will lower water quality. Ladies and gentlemen, the contamination of reservoirs itself is at no considerable risk. However, the dubious opponents have obviously neglected the fact that our tap water does not come straight from reservoirs. SA Water manages 42 water treatment plants, which removes impurities, filters the water, and disinfects it so it's safe to drink. The water from our reservoirs goes through this same system, meaning no matter how contaminated the water may be, it comes into our taps clean and of great quality. Otherwise, we would have already seen this problem. This linked into our second point about how water prices will rise. As previously mentioned, water is filtered before entering our domestic water system, and therefore the water quality is treated, which means previous diseases within the water will be eliminated. The opposing team has stated that opening reservoirs can lead to health risks amongst any visitors. Just like with any recreational activity, there are always rules and regulations that must be complied with to ensure maximum benefit by keeping everyone safe as well as the environment. These rules can be seen in the government's reservoir opening plan. It says, just like taking a swim in the Great Barrier Reef, there are regulations put into place for the safety of the swimmer, as well as flora and fauna. By entering a reservoir, you need to be aware of the possibility of these risks. The government's rules for opening these reservoirs state that users must act in a safe and environmentally sustainable manner and at their own risk. Therefore, with strict and responsible rules and regulations, the opening of reservoirs to the public will be safe and beneficial, meaning there is no risk to the general public. Our first speaker has addressed the significant economical benefits to opening the reservoirs. Since reservoirs have been opened for recreational purposes in Queensland, the Queensland Outdoor Recreation Foundation found that profit relating to outdoor recreation increased by 15%. The South Australian Government will financially benefit through the opening of these reservoirs. She also raised the point on how opening reservoirs will support Australia's image as a tourist destination. This, of course, will boost tourism and lead to an increase of employment. Our second speaker has honed in on the idea of urban sprawl and how South Australia is starting to lack recreational spaces due to modern expansion. They also talked about how the water from reservoirs is filtered and cleaned after exiting the reservoir, and therefore recreational activities will have no effect on the water quality. So, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we, the Affirmative team, strongly believe that reservoirs in South Australia should be opened for recreational activities, for us to enjoy, explore, preserve. Thank you.
Upon the third negative speaker, Emma Poole.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. As third speaker for the negative team tonight, I will rebut the opposition's case based on the fact that reservoirs in South Australia should be open for recreational use and sum up our team's argument. The Affirmative team has used 4 main points as the foundation of their argument. Their first point was that the benefits have been shown in other trials. This is flawed as these reservoirs won't begin by having all the problems stated by my first and second speakers immediately. It will build resistance and the problems will become over time. We have the chance to prevent the problems from happening before things begin to get worse, especially when climate change is beginning to be too hard to ignore. Just because they don't happen immediately doesn't mean they won't ever happen.
For example, a certain pathogen, when exposed to bodies of water, mass reproduces, making the water very unsafe and allowing certain bacteria that miss the treatment process to enter the human body when consumed. This is simply not worth the risk, and it is far easier and efficient to deny access for recreational activities. The next point was that reservoirs will attract tourists. This is flawed, as even though, yes, we acknowledge the potential tourists could come to more rural areas to enjoy recreational activities which might benefit the economy, we must again realise that the money has to be made at a cost, and this risk far outweighs any possible incomes. Besides, any money made from tourism will need to be used for the treatment of the water and any potential employees from the area, which costs quite a lot. The economic benefits do not outweigh the environmental impacts. As a state and as a nation, we should be striving to protect the natural environment as much as we can, especially with the threat of climate change coming ever closer. My second negative speaker has already explained and highlighted all the negative environmental impacts, and we, the negative team, want to again push the fact that the negatives far outweigh the positives, and we need to protect the potential people and the environment. The second speaker from the negative team brought up the idea that there is no difference in the quality of the water. This is flawed because, as the first speaker explained, these recreational activities will contaminate the water, causing illnesses to occur. The water quality of the reservoirs cannot be sustained and ensured, and tests and filtering is time-consuming and too costly. Before being filtered and treated, a sample of the untreated water must be collected, transported, tested, and analysed in a lab. This can often take multiple weeks. In most cases, this means that the water tested would have finished at the treatment plant and possibly at the consumer's tap before the results are received. This time delay means that water needs special kinds. If the water needs a special kind of treatment for bacterial contaminations, pathogens and some other chemicals could be still in the water. These chemicals, pathogens and contaminations are found to be the offsets of recreational activities, as stated by my second and first speakers. This means that recreational activities have an impact on the water quality, and any chemicals can't be treated as well. It would be the best option to simply eliminate and restrict the problem. Therefore, as stated by Ross Young, who is the Executive Director of Water Services Association of Australia and the author of a research report number 24 in coordination with the Water Quality and Treatment Commission and Sydney Catchment Authority, the guidelines of the ADWG clearly enunciate that the reliance on treatments and filters is considered highly inappropriate, as the time delay between sampling and treatment means any special treatment for the water will not occur in time. Their next point was that we need to open up the reservoirs as urbanisation is taking over our natural spaces. However, this is flawed as the reservoirs need to stay protected, and it's up to us to realise that introducing continuous human interaction with our reservoirs will not help sustain our healthy environment in these areas. There are far too many alternatives to consider valuing recreational activities over the health, safety and protection of the environment and any humans that might be exposed to these risks. Our first speaker spoke to you about how the recreational activities in reservoirs around South Australia would have detrimental impact on our water quality, as the activities lead to water contamination which is not healthy for humans. She also explained how the cost for treatment of the water would increase dramatically. Our second speaker spoke to you about the negative impact recreational activities have on the environment and how we shouldn't value our own entertainment over the safety of the environment. She also explained... Thank you.